What if the person you were meeting from Craigslist was hiding something far darker than you could ever imagine? A few months ago, I answered an ad for what seemed like an innocent, well-priced couch. Little did I know the exchange would unravel into a series of events that left me questioning whether I was ever really alone. From strange encounters to unsettling phone calls, these are the true, spine-chilling Craigslist horror stories that will make you think twice before clicking apply. But before we delve into tonight's terrifying tales, a huge shout out to all of you. Your support fuels this channel and keeps the nightmares coming. If our eerie stories captivate you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a chilling episode. And if you want to help us grow and keep the fear alive, share our videos, drop a comment, or explore our support options on Patreon or Ko-fi. Every bit of support helps us bring you the best spine-tingling content. Thank you for joining us on this dark journey. Now let's embrace the shadows together. I had been scouring Craigslist for a few weeks, hoping to find a place to stay for a few months. Most apartments required at least a 1-year lease, which wasn't an option for me, but Craigslist seemed like a good alternative. Private owners often posted rooms or homes for rent with more flexible terms. It was a bit of a gamble, but the prices were usually better and the landlords more willing to negotiate. After about a month of searching, I'd seen a few listings and visited some places, but they had all fallen through at the last minute. Just when I was starting to feel frustrated, I came across a new listing that seemed promising. It was another room for rent in someone's home, located about 20 minutes from where I lived. The person posting the ad was a 22-year-old guy, so I sent him a message and we exchanged texts for a few days before setting up a time for me to see the place. When I finally drove out to the address, my excitement quickly started to fade. The neighborhood didn't look great. Most of the houses appeared run down, with overgrown yards and junk scattered around. It was the kind of place that gave the impression the owners were struggling to keep up with basic maintenance. Still, I figured it couldn't hurt to check it out, so I parked in the driveway and got out. I rang the doorbell, but it didn't work, so I knocked. I was standing there for a few moments before I heard heavy footsteps from the other side of the door. There was an awkward silence, maybe 15 seconds, before the door cracked open just a little. A man's face appeared, and he asked for my name. I gave him a nervous smile and introduced myself. He opened the door fully, welcoming me inside. He was taller than I expected, lean, with shoulder-length hair and tattoos peeking out from under his shirt. He didn't look like he was in his 20s, though. I'd guess he was somewhere in his mid-30s, maybe older. By this point, I was already inside the house, and he quickly started leading me through the hallway. His pace was fast, and he talked non-stop, which made it hard to focus on what was happening around me. The house itself was old and in bad shape. The kitchen was dingy, with cabinets hanging loosely off their hinges. We didn't spend much time in there before he moved me down the hall to a room. He opened the door to the first one and gestured toward it. "This will be your room," he said, as if I were already moving in. At that moment, I finally had a chance to pause and take in what was happening. Something felt off. I had already invested too much time, so I figured I might as well finish the tour and just walk away afterward. But as I stood there for a second, the man's demeanor suddenly shifted. His face went from friendly to completely cold, and without saying a word, he started walking toward me. I was caught off guard, but instinctively I stepped back. As soon as I moved, he quickened his pace, matching me step for step. Panic set in, and I turned around and sprinted down the hallway. I heard him stop at the front door, slam it shut behind me as I fled out of the house. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had almost happened. My heart was racing, and I felt foolish for ever stepping inside. Nothing overtly dangerous had occurred, but every instinct told me I was lucky to get out of there. I was so shaken that I never went back to Craigslist after that. I couldn't bring myself to trust it again. On January 2nd, 2016, a chilling and disturbing post appeared in the personal section of Craigslist. The personal section on the platform had long been a place for people seeking everything from casual connections and friendship to venting their frustrations or sharing personal experiences. It was a space with a mix of both legitimate and questionable intentions, and over time it gained a reputation for hosting scams and even illegal activity. By 2018, Craigslist completely shut down the personal section in response to growing concerns. This particular ad, however, stood out for its sinister nature. The post, which appeared to be from a self-proclaimed serial killer, included unsettling details that sent shockwaves through the local community. The author of the post claimed to have committed a murder in Tulsa, specifically mentioning two local public figures by name: Julie Free, an employee of the Department of Corrections, and Judge Glasgow, who worked in the probate division of the Tulsa County District Court. The post ominously stated that the killer would strike again and referenced a future plan to target Oklahoma City. It was titled Tulsa Murderer, and in it, the author thanked the city for being the site of their first kill. The post read, "I want to thank Tulsa for letting me have my first kill. It all started here, and I was thinking it should also be my last. I was nervous as hell, but I'll get over it. It's stranger on stranger, so the police will have a difficult time. It will not be my last, though, thinking about going to OKC next. To the people who started it all, Julie Free, Judge Glasgow." The post immediately drew the attention of authorities. It was reported to the Tulsa Police Department, and an investigation was launched. The mention of two public officials who worked in overlapping sectors of the criminal justice system raised immediate concerns. Police speculated that the post could have been the work of someone with prior involvement in the justice system, possibly seeking revenge or trying to tarnish the reputations of those named. Craigslist provided the police with all the information they had about the post, but despite efforts to track the source, no solid leads emerged. Investigators found that no recent crimes in Tulsa matched the details mentioned in the post. Initially, police thought it was likely a hoax or an elaborate prank, but they could never definitively prove it. Despite this, the fact that the ad specifically named two public figures led some to wonder if it was part of something far darker, perhaps a real threat or a warped form of retribution. What made the situation even more unsettling was that a similar case had occurred before. A few years earlier, the Tulsa police had dealt with a case in which an anonymous individual had sent out disturbing text messages asking random people where to bury a body. The combination of eerie, seemingly specific threats and the direct targeting of public officials made this case stand out as especially concerning. But to this day, it's still unclear whether the Craigslist post was a cruel hoax or part of something much more dangerous. In August 2014, another disturbing Craigslist ad made headlines. This time, an 18-year-old girl named Haley Turner posted an ad on Craigslist claiming she was looking to be abducted and taken away. The post quickly attracted attention online, but as far as records show, the actual content of the ad has since been removed. Just days after the post, Haley left her home in Michigan, telling her mother she was going to run an errand. A short time later, she called a friend, explaining that she had seen a man lying in a ditch on the side of the road and planned to get out of her car to check if he was okay. The conversation then took a dark turn when Haley reportedly said, "He has a gun," before the line went silent. Panicked, her friend immediately contacted Haley's father, who rushed to the area just north of Ohio, near Bedford Township, where he found his daughter's car idling on the side of the road. But Haley was nowhere to be seen. Haley was reported missing and a full investigation was launched. Strangely, police soon discovered that Haley had rented DVDs from a family video store near Toledo, Ohio, just hours before her disappearance. The footage from the video store didn't show anything out of the ordinary, and there were no signs of struggle or violence on Haley's body when she was found 16 hours later. A local resident had discovered her standing on a random street corner holding a puppy near Detroit. Haley claimed that she had been abducted at gunpoint the previous evening, but had managed to escape by jumping from the moving vehicle that was supposedly holding her captive. Her story, however, didn't add up. After hours of questioning, Haley admitted to fabricating the entire story. She had made up the abduction in an apparent attempt to get attention, and the police concluded that her actions were a form of a false police report. Haley was charged with filing a false police report, sentenced to 3 years of probation, 1 month of community service, and ordered to pay a $115,000 fine to reimburse the sheriff's department for the cost of the search. Her motives were never fully explained, though her mother later said that Haley had been going through an emotionally difficult period, which might have driven her to make the false claim. Some of Haley's other posts on Craigslist indicated a pattern of seeking attention online, though these have since been deleted. Perhaps the most chilling part of this story was the fact that one man had actually responded to Haley's ad, expressing interest in carrying out the abduction. This individual was never found, and it's unclear what his intentions might have been. The idea that someone was willing to abduct a young woman for money is deeply disturbing, and the fact that he was never apprehended leaves open unsettling questions about what might have happened if Haley had gone through with her plan. These strange and troubling Craigslist incidents leave us with lingering questions about the darker side of human nature and the kind of dangers lurking behind anonymous online posts. A few years ago, I was in my early 20s and living in a small town. I had just moved to a new city for a job opportunity and needed a place to stay while I searched for something more permanent. Renting a room in a shared house seemed like an affordable option, so I turned to Craigslist. I found a few listings that seemed decent, but one in particular caught my attention. It was a cheap room in a house in a quiet neighborhood with a promise of a laid-back, friendly living situation. The post was written by a woman named Sarah, and the photos she posted of the house seemed nice, simple, clean, with a spacious backyard and a cozy living room. The price was more than reasonable for the area, and the location was convenient for work. I texted her, and after a few exchanges, she invited me to come by and see the room. When I arrived at the house, I was a little surprised by the condition of the exterior. It was more run down than the pictures had suggested, but still it wasn't horrible. I rang the doorbell and Sarah opened the door. She was in her late 30s, with a warm smile and a friendly demeanor. She led me inside and I was immediately hit by the smell of something odd. It wasn't offensive, just off. The house was mostly quiet with some light music playing in the background. Sarah gave me a quick tour. The room I would be renting was actually pretty nice. It had a big window, decent closet space, and a small desk. Everything seemed in order. As we walked through the house, though, I started noticing things that made me uncomfortable. The living room was filled with weird, eclectic decorations, mostly odd sculptures and framed photos of people I didn't recognize. The house itself felt strangely empty, like it hadn't been lived in for a while. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Sarah seemed nice and the room was a good deal. We sat down in the kitchen to talk about the terms. That's when things started to feel a little off. She started talking about herself, how she worked from home, how she didn't have a lot of friends, and how she was hoping to find someone low maintenance to share the space. Then she started asking me personal questions, way too personal. Do you drink? Do you smoke? Are you into yoga or meditation? It felt less like small talk and more like she was trying to size me up, but I shrugged it off, figuring she was just being thorough. I agreed to rent the room, and we set a move-in date for the following week. I signed a basic agreement, no big deal, and handed over the first month's rent. The first few days living there were uneventful, but I quickly began to feel a sense of unease. Sarah was always around, always in the kitchen or living room, and I started to notice that she would keep the door to her bedroom cracked open just enough for me to see her sitting there, staring at her computer screen. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming she was just working. But then she started to leave notes for me. At first they were harmless enough, little things like, please keep the kitchen clean or don't forget to take out the trash. But then they started getting a little more intense. I found one taped to the fridge that read, please don't be late coming home tonight. I get nervous when I'm alone. I thought it was odd, but I didn't say anything. Things escalated over the next few days. I came home from work one evening to find the door to my room wide open. Sarah was sitting on my bed, reading a book. She acted completely normal, like it was no big deal, but I was freaked out. I didn't want to make a scene, so I just told her I needed some space and closed the door. That's when I started noticing even more oddities, like the fact that my stuff was sometimes moved around, just slightly. My toiletries would be shuffled, or my shoes were out of place. The real tipping point came a few days later. I had planned to stay late at work, so I texted Sarah to let her know I'd be home late. When I finally arrived around midnight, I found the house dark and silent. I was exhausted, so I just went to my room, intending to crash for the night. But as I was about to lie down, I noticed something that made my heart stop. A small notebook was on my bed, wedged between the sheets. I opened it. Inside, it was filled with pages and pages of writing in Sarah's handwriting. At first, I thought it was just a journal or a sketchbook, but as I flipped through the pages, I realized it was all about me. Every page was filled with notes about my habits, my routines, even things I'd mentioned in passing conversations, how often I went to the gym, what I ate for lunch, what time I came home from work. I was in shock. My stomach dropped and I couldn't breathe. Had Sarah been watching me? Had she been tracking my every move? I immediately packed a bag and left the house that night. I texted Sarah the next morning, telling her I was no longer interested in living there and would be leaving. She replied almost immediately with a single text. I knew you'd leave. You were always too perfect to be real. I never heard from her again after that. I got out of there as fast as I could and found a different place to live. To this day, I have no idea what was going on with Sarah, but I never rented from Craigslist again. The whole experience still haunts me. It felt like I was being watched the whole time, and I'll never forget the feeling of seeing my life written down in that notebook. This happened about 3 years ago when I was in my late 20s. I had recently moved to a city and I needed a break from the hectic pace of urban life. I wanted a peaceful, secluded place in the woods where I could get away for a weekend to recharge, somewhere far enough from the city that I could truly disconnect, but not too far that it would be impossible to get to. I started looking for places on Craigslist. After a few days of searching, I found an ad that looked perfect. The listing was for a tiny, rustic cabin for rent in the woods about 2 hours outside of town. The price was reasonable, and the photos of the cabin were idyllic, small, cozy, surrounded by tall trees with a beautiful stream running nearby. It looked like the perfect weekend getaway. The owner, a man named Tom, was very responsive to my messages. He seemed nice enough, though a little odd. He said he was renting it out because he had to go away for work, and he only used the cabin a few times a year. He offered to meet me in person, and show me around before I committed. I took him up on the offer and we arranged to meet at a small gas station on the edge of town. When I arrived, Tom was already there, leaning against an old truck, his arms crossed. He was in his mid-40s, a little scruffy looking, with long hair and a beard that made him look like he'd been living off the grid for years. He gave me a quick smile and led me to the cabin. The drive there was longer than I had expected, and the roads became increasingly narrow and bumpy. The further we went, the more isolated it felt. After a while, the last signs of civilization disappeared entirely. We finally turned onto a gravel road that wound through thick forest, and after a few more minutes, we reached the cabin. At first, I thought it was beautiful. The cabin was exactly like the pictures, tucked away between trees with a small porch and a fire pit. But something about the place made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed to close in on the house, or the silence that felt too heavy. Tom led me inside and gave me a quick tour. It was small but charming, with a wood-burning stove and a few mismatched pieces of furniture. The bedroom had a large window that looked out into the woods. It was the kind of place you could imagine getting lost in for a few days. However, something about Tom's behavior started to feel strange. He kept talking about how quiet it was up here, how peaceful it was. He said he came up there to clear his head and that he liked being far from people. As he spoke, his eyes kept darting to the windows like he was expecting someone to show up at any moment. His voice was calm, but there was a nervous energy beneath it, a sense of urgency that I couldn't quite place. I told him I was interested and asked about the rental agreement. He said there was no formal contract, but that I could pay him directly in cash. He handed me the keys and seemed to linger a little too long as I took them from him. His eyes flickered toward the woods, then back to me. And then he said something that made my skin crawl. "You'll be okay out here. Just be careful at night, though. The forest has its own way of keeping people around." I didn't think much of it at the time, just some weird small talk. But as I left the cabin and headed back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Tom's demeanor lingered in the back of my mind, and I couldn't help but feel like I had walked into something I didn't fully understand. That evening I drove back to the cabin, checked in, and settled in for a quiet night. The place was exactly what I wanted, isolated, peaceful, and surrounded by nature. I lit a fire in the wood stove and made myself dinner, trying to relax. But as night fell, I began to feel increasingly uneasy. The woods outside were pitch black, and the only sounds I could hear were the occasional rustle of leaves and the crackling of the fire. It was so quiet that it almost felt wrong. Around 10 p.m., I decided to turn in for the night. I locked all the doors, closed the blinds, and crawled into bed. As I lay there, listening to the absolute silence, I thought I heard a faint knock at the door. At first, I dismissed it, thinking it was just the wind. But then it came again, 3 knocks, sharp and deliberate. I froze. I tried to calm myself down, but the knocking continued, louder this time, followed by a soft scraping sound against the door. My heart raced. I got up slowly, tiptoeing to the door. The knocking stopped, and I stood there for a long moment, too scared to open the door. Then, as if on cue, the scraping started again. This time, louder, like something was being dragged across the door. I backed away from the door and grabbed my phone to call Tom, but before I could dial, I heard a voice, low and muffled, like someone was standing just outside the door. "Let me in." I could barely breathe. I was frozen in place, staring at the door. I tried to convince myself it was some wild animal or a prank, but something deep in my gut told me that wasn't it. I didn't dare open the door. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, clutching my phone, listening to the unsettling sounds outside. At some point, I heard footsteps walking away, but I didn't dare check. When morning came, I packed my things and left before the sun fully rose, driving straight back to the city without a second thought. The worst part? As I was driving away, I saw Tom's truck, parked by the side of the gravel road, hidden behind some trees. He was just standing there, watching me leave. He didn't wave or try to speak to me. He just stared at me as I drove past. I haven't been back to that cabin. I never even asked for my money back. It was just a strange, terrifying experience I wanted to forget. But I still don't understand what happened out there. To this day, I don't know if it was a prank, if Tom was messing with me, or if something darker was really going on in those woods. If you've encountered a terrifying event, or have a spine-chilling horror story to share, we at Eerie Shadows want to hear from you. Share your experiences with us, and let's uncover the mysteries lurking in the eerie shadows together. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more eerie tales and spine-chilling stories like this one.